Good evening, everyone. This is Brown at IF Brown, and on this night before Halloween, we are going to be talking about John Carpenter's The Fog, the special edition on DVD. The Fog came out in 1980, and it was the fourth theatrical film directed by John Carpenter. It was made on a budget of a little over $1 million, and it went on to gross somewhere between 21 and 22 million, so it was definitely a success at the box office. And this particular special edition was released in 2002. And I actually saw The Fog for the first time courtesy of this special edition. And this was as the special edition came out for the first time. And I can honestly say that I was still in high school when I saw The Fog for the first time. And I don't remember if I got the movie at Target or Blockbuster, but Blockbuster was definitely still in existence. So we're going way back. And I've rewatched The Fog on more than one occasion in between my high school days and now, so I'm definitely a fan of the movie. But rewatching it for the purpose of doing this review made me appreciate it even more because, I mean, this is an old school John Carpenter movie wherein, he was on fire. I mean, he was eager, he was hungry. And so there was a distinct, energy and vitality, that you found, say, in his earlier work than, say, his later day work. But you also have a threat that is, genuinely supernatural in nature because, with his prior two movies, so he had made three other movies, or theatrical movies prior to this one. You had Dark Star, which was a sci-fi stoner comedy, and then you had Assault on Precinct 13, which was an action thriller, and then you had Halloween, which is a horror classic. So with Assault on Precinct 13, the main threat was this seemingly endless army, that was a street gang. And there was something that was very much reminiscent of Night of the Living Dead in the sense that you had this seemingly unending horde attacking the main characters in an isolated location. And John Carpenter had gone on record to say that Night of the Living Dead was one of the movies that inspired him when he made Assault on Precinct 13. But other than, say, there being a similarity to Night of the Living Dead, the threat isn't really, anything supernatural. It's just, this unending, horde that's the street gang. But on the other hand, though, with Halloween, the lines were kind of blurred. I mean, there was enough evidence to support the notion that Michael Myers was just an ordinary guy who happened to be, strong and insane. But on the other hand, there was enough evidence to support the notion that there was something more than human, at work. There was something supernaturally evil driving Michael Myers. And with The Fog, there's no ambiguity whatsoever. I mean, the threat is straight up supernatural because when John Carpenter and Debra Hill, who was his writing partners and as well as a producer, when the two of them worked together, to create another horror movie, they didn't want to just do another retreat of Halloween and throw out another slasher film. They instead wanted to do a ghost story, and put that on screen. And so as a result, I mean, we have one of the most unique and atmospheric films of John Carpenter's career, at least in my opinion. But let's go ahead and get into it. So as the movie starts off, it's a few minutes till midnight, and we have the elderly gentleman, Mr. Mencken, who's telling this assembled group of children a series of ghost stories. And as the clock winds down to midnight, he tells them a story that shortly precedes the founding of their town, Antonio Bay. So Antonio Bay is a little coastal town, in Southern California. And as Mr. Mencken tells the story, this was shortly before the town's founding, and this ship was, coming, to the land, and they were going to settle there. But they were beset by this strange, unearthly fog that just came out of nowhere. But once they made it through the fog, they saw that there was a signal fire on the beach. And so they were expecting that, in order to be able to land there. But unfortunately, this wasn't the signal fire they were expecting. It was just a random campfire that ultimately led them to their deaths, because by following that campfire, they end up crashing on the rocks, and the ship breaks apart, and all hands, are drowned. And so, as the story goes, the spirits of those who died that night would one day come back and seek revenge and try and find the ones who left that campfire on the beach, and thus led to their deaths. And so as the clock strikes midnight, a bunch of weird things happen in Antonio Bay. You have objects moving by themselves. You have electronics acting up. So basically, a bunch of weird shit happens, and something wicked this way comes. And around the same time, you have the character of Father Malone, who makes an unexpected discovery at his church, namely by way of having, something fall through the ceiling. And it turns out that this is a diary, and it's a diary belonging to someone who happens to be an ancestor of his. And as he, reads the diary, he makes a rather unsettling discovery, because as he reveals to a couple other, characters later in the movie, it turns out that, that particular ship that crashed, the one that Mr. Mencken was talking about when he was telling the ghost stories to the children, Father Malone learns that this particular ship that crashed belonged to a gentleman named Blake, who had wanted to establish a leper colony on the land that would eventually become Antonio Bay. But Father Malone's ancestor and some other individuals who were the ones who had originally made plans to settle there in the first place were very put off by the idea of sharing their homes or their land with a leper colony. And so what they did was they set up a false landing fire, or basically a false signal fire, where the people on the ship would see and think, hey, we can land here safely, because they knew that that those who were working with Father Malone's ancestor were going to be on the land to be able to help them land safely. But of course, Father Malone's ancestor and those that conspired with him were going to do anything, but have the crew land safely. And so they set up a false signal fire, and the deed was done, and the ship went down with all hands. But Father Malone, though, also learns that after the ship went down, his ancestor and fellow conspirators looted the ship and found a bunch of gold, and which they knew was going to be on board, because Blake was a wealthy individual who just happened to be afflicted with leprosy. But Malone's ancestor, as well as his fellow conspirators, found Blake's gold and used that to financially establish the town of Antonio Bay. And so all these years, Antonio Bay's basically been honoring and living off of the legacy of murderers without even knowing it until this particular night. And so Father Malone is more than a little shaken, considering that one of the people who was guilty of this crime was an ancestor of his. And of course, the people that he tells us to, one of which was a councilwoman named Kathy, who basically is in charge of any local festivities and special events. She's certainly more than a little shocked by this revelation, but she's not wanting to put it off because it's kind of a town tradition to every night of the anniversary of this ship that crashed. Basically, they honor the memory of those who died trying to establish the colony, because as far as they knew, the people that died on the ship were just ordinary colonists who were sadly led astray by an errant signal fire. And so they don't know anything about the conspiracy or anything like that, but at the same time there's just too much importance to say just call the event off. But in the meantime, though, right as Father Malone had discovered the diary, and prior to him telling the councilwoman Kathy about it, there was this fishing boat with a group of friends on board on the night where everything went crazy, that was suddenly beset by this unearthly fog, much like the one described by Mr. Mencken, who was telling the story to the children. But this group of friends is beset by the fog, and out of the fog comes this ancient ship from the 1800s at least. I mean, it's rotted, it's old, full of seaweed and everything, and it pulls up alongside them. And as the fog parts ways just a little bit, the friends on the fishing boat, they see that there are these ghostly figures on the other boat, just facing them. And as the fog sort of crisscrosses, it seems like these ominous figures are just kind of coming closer, until suddenly all three of the people on board the fishing boat are brutally slaughtered by these ghostly figures. And then that particular group is declared missing, because they were actually supposed to come in that morning after midnight, because they had some parts in the festivities and what have you, and they were part of the community. And one of the people on that boat was in fact the husband of the councilwoman Kathy. And so as it happens, one of the other members of the community, a gentleman named Nick, was making his way into town on the night of on the night where everything went haywire, and he picked up a hitchhiker named Elizabeth, and the two of them hit it off okay. But they were affected by this wave of supernatural events. Namely, all the windows on Nick's truck are suddenly shattered out of nowhere, with little to no explanation. And when the two of them make it back to Nick's place, for the remainder of the night, they're greeted, by an ominous knocking at Nick's door. And it's this, strange-looking figure that's silhouetted, through the window. And what little we could see, we see like this, seaweed-covered hand, and rotted skin, with, an ominous, bladed weapon, right? But of course, neither Nick nor Elizabeth can see that from where they're in the house. But then, when the clock strikes one, everything the clock shatters, or the glass in the clock shatters. And when Nick opens the door, it's a bunch of fog, but there's no one there. And so, once 1 o'clock had hit, that's when the crazy, weird, supernatural stuff kind of winded down, seemingly. But sure enough, though, as the day goes on, some other weird things happen. You have one of the other residents of the town is, the local disc jockey, Stevie Wayne, who is a single mother raising her son Andy in the town of Antonio Bay. And, basically they've established roots there. But Andy, who was one of the children in the group that Mr. Mencken was telling the ghost story to, on the following morning, he finds this gold coin on the beach, and when he goes to grab it, it's covered by the water of the ocean, and when he can see it again, it's no longer a coin, but it's this rotted wooden plank that says the name of the ship that that Father Malone was reading about in the journal. Of course, Andy doesn't know anything about that at this point, but he's like, this gold coin turned into a wooden plank with a name on it, and so he takes it to his mom, and and at first, she's thinking that her son just, is telling some crazy story and found, a piece of, driftwood, from a long time ago, right? But, something weird happens where she set it down on some radio equipment, because this is just a piece of wood, and at this point, they've dried it off, but suddenly water just starts pouring out of it and onto some of the electronics equipment. And as the water, gets into it, the pre-recorded stuff that she has on tapes starts getting distorted, and this, really, ominous, man's voice, comes out of the radio and starts, spewing stuff about the albatross, and then, saying, 6 must die, or 6 will die. And, basically, getting really dark and spooky, with, what, is, seemingly in this foreshadowing of death and terror. But then the electronics, just start to catch fire, and so Stevie puts the fire out with an extinguisher, but then once everything clears, everything's back to normal, and so she's just like, what the hell just happened, right? But so as the day turns into the night, I mean, it's basically the night of the anniversary of not only the founding of Antonio Bay, but when that ship crashed on the beach. And and after Father Malone had read the journal, he comes to realize that the ghosts are going to be coming back, the ghosts of the people who were led astray on the ship onto the the beach and drowned. They're going to be coming back to look for the conspirators, the ones who led them to their deaths. And so as night comes, so does the fog, and that's when the ghosts make their way into the town and target anyone who's unlucky enough to be out and about, or anyone who's unwise enough to open their door when everything else is foggy outside. But this was a very atmospheric, very spooky horror movie. And I have to say that it really does feel like you're watching a ghost story unfold on screen, because I mean the way the movie opens up, I mean it opens up with a ghost story, but then as the movie goes on, the main characters are caught up in a ghost story, and it's just everyone involved in the movie did a really good job of conveying that. I mean, you have this, seaside, town of Antonio Bay. I mean, it just, looks like something that on one hand is kind of a picturesque, coastal town, right? But then as the supernatural comes in and you see, the fog rolling in, and you see, these ghostly figures, making their way through the town, seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, you see the fog, and then as it parts here and there, you see them just sort of, coming out, and it's just a really unsettling effect when you see them. And it's almost always at night, or when the sun's going down, when this stuff comes into effect, or when you see the fog in action. But I liked how, I mean, say when Stevie Wayne's on the radio, talking to, say, the weather station about the fog, and like trying to say, keep an eye on things to make sure that any fishermen out there are made aware of it. Even she's noticing something about the fog because it's going against the wind, as opposed to, say, with the wind, like most fog usually does. And so even like, I guess you could say, just the fact that you have people noticing that there's something strange going on, with something that's weather related. I mean, I thought that was actually a nice touch. And speaking of Stevie Wayne, she's played by the actress Adrienne Barbeau, and she does a really good job in the part, and you really buy the fact that she's, this loving single mother, and she's, worked to, basically, have her spot in the town, as well as her own successful radio station. You get the impression that she's really worked for it, she's earned it, but she also, I liked her radio persona, because her voice is soft and sultry, and when she's like playing, announcing what songs are being played or something like that, or when she's saying "Ahoy, mateys," and telling anyone out on the ocean to look out for say the fog or any other inclement weather. It's a very sexy voice, but then when she's away from the radio, it's just her normal sounding voice. And I liked how she kind of did a good job of portraying someone who's a DJ, and the mannerisms they have as far as that goes. But also, I thought it was interesting how, excuse me, even though she's one of the main characters, I mean, she and her son Andy are some of the main characters, she herself doesn't have a whole lot in the way of interaction with the other main characters, because for the most part, she spends the majority of the movie at her lighthouse, where she has her radio station. But she's able to see the fog as it comes in, and how it's glowing, and there's just something very ominous and very strange about this fog. It's glowing, it's going against the wind, and also other people are reporting strange how the behavior, so to speak, of the fog is very strange as well. But yeah, I mean, she's one of the people that figures out there's something wrong here, or there's something strange at work, and she doesn't know anything about the story that Father Malone discovered from that journal of his ancestors. But she's just she's kind of like the audience surrogate in a way, in the sense that as the audience, we're aware of I guess you could say the cause of the fog, or where it's coming from, or who it's coming from, or who's involved in the fog, but we don't know. But at the same time, though, we're seeing things through her eyes, in the sense that we're just seeing like the immediate effects of the fog, as opposed to, say, knowing what's behind the fog. So whenever she gets attacked by the denizens from the fog, I mean, she doesn't know who they are or why they're after her or anything like that. She's just fighting for her life on this night of the anniversary of Antonio Bay, and everything suddenly goes to hell. But Adrienne Barbeau, though, did a very good job in the part. And she also had very good chemistry with Ty Mitchell, who was the, at the time, young actor who played her son Andy. And you really bought that she was this loving maternal figure. And so when it comes to the point where Andy, who was being babysat, when the fog actually comes into the town, she's trying to get through to the sheriff. She's trying to get through to the house where Andy's being babysat. But then when the fog cuts off communication, yeah, it does that. You see Adrienne Barbeau basically portray Stevie going into full-on mama bear mode, and just screaming out and begging for anyone listening to get to the house that Andy's at, and to get him out of there, because the fog was heading that way. And it's a very intense moment on Adrienne Barbeau's part as far as acting goes, and she just knocked it out of the park. But also, Janet Leigh from Psycho is the actress who plays Kathy, the woman in charge of the festivities of the town. And I really liked seeing her character, because on one hand, Janet plays, her character as someone who is in a position of authority, and is, sort of having to keep up a public, persona for the sake of, the town populace, right? Because, when they see her happy, they're happy. But if she shows that something's wrong, they're kind of like, oh, what's wrong here? She's just, that much of a fixture of the community, to where it's like, if she's not happy, they're not happy. But if she's happy, they're happy. But thing is, since her husband was one of the people that was, killed on that fishing boat, but of course she doesn't know that he's been killed, but he's gone missing. Since her husband's one of the people that's gone missing, courtesy of the ghosts in the fog, she's in a rather an emotional state, when she finds this, when she learns this, and she's under the pressure of having to go through the motions of announcing the festivities and leading the event and everything to honor the anniversary of the town, right? But she can't just break down and cry like she wants to, because her husband's missing and most likely dead. But instead she has to try and put on a good face for the public. And I thought that was a rather interesting portrayal of, say, like the town politician. And I also appreciate the fact that while she is a politician, she's not, say, like you'd see in other movies where a politician is like two-faced, like they're smiling on the surface, but then as soon as they're away from the audience, they're like, oh God, I hate such and such, let's screw over such so and so to get the money from this, that, or the other. Like she's actually a politician who cares about the well-being of her town. It's just she's in a rather intense emotional situation on this particular night of all nights. If it was any other night, I mean, it'd be bad enough, but the fact that these crazy things are happening, like her dog's out barking at the shore, seemingly at nothing, and her husband's missing, and just all these weird things that she's heard about happening in the town, and it's all going and it's all, transpiring on, the day and night of, the anniversary of the town's founding. I mean, no pressure, but Janet Leigh just did a really good job, playing, the part of someone who was a town politician, but one who cared about the well-being of their town, but was nonetheless having to keep up a public face. And also, it was just really cool seeing Janet Leigh in another horror movie. And apparently, she had actually been such a fan of John Carpenter's Halloween that she got in touch with him and said, "Hey, if you ever do another horror movie anytime soon, I want in." And sure enough, when he did The Fog, he's like, "Hey, you still want in?" She's like, "Oh yes." So yeah, Janet Leigh was a John Carpenter fan, and apparently she had a blast working on The Fog. So that's good to know. You also have Tom Atkins, who plays the town resident Nick, who was friends with one of the fishermen on the boat that was attacked by the ghosts in the fog, and or I should say Blake, and the ghosts of Blake and his crew in the fog, and basically you see someone who, like, he's not, say, like a one-man army or the ultimate badass or anything like that. I mean, he's sort of this grizzled veteran of the town, in a sense that he's been working with boats and fishing for most of his life, so he's a grizzled veteran in that regard. But at the same time, it's kind of like he knows the sea, and he knows that something's wrong when his friend goes missing, because he's talking about how he's gotten drunk with his friend more than once, but he knows that no matter how drunk his friend gets, I mean, he's never going to get to where he stays out on the ocean and doesn't come back in the morning, and so he knows that something's up. He also has this rather neat little scene where he's talking to Elizabeth, and this is when they found the boat, that had gone missing, and before they, find out what happened to the crew, but they're waiting for the Coast Guard to come in, and Tom Atkins, when he's playing this part as Nick in the scene, he tells Elizabeth about how something weird happened with him a long time ago when he was a kid. His father had found this golden coin on the beach, and it was from, like, a long time ago, right? And so he took it and he put it in his pocket, and there was no hole in the pocket. And so when his father came home, he told him about, and he told his son about it, about what he found on the beach. He reaches into his pocket, there's nothing there, and it couldn't have fallen out because there was no hole. But best his father could figure, it just plain disappeared. And even though Nick never saw that coin, he remembered the way his father reacted to that coin not being there. And so he's open to the possibility of, say, the supernatural being a force at work, right? But this is before, he knows that there's something straight up supernatural going on. But the fact that they had that little scene establishing that, he's not someone who's going to outright balk, at the notion of the supernatural, that was a nice touch. And plus, it was just good acting on Tom Atkins' part, because you really see him kind of going back to when he's a kid and, just, remembering that. And also, I liked how, you saw him in kind of a take charge way, in the sense that while he wasn't like a one-man army or ultimate badass, I mean, he is a man, and when there's danger afoot and someone's needing help, he's the first guy who puts his life on the line, namely when he and Elizabeth on the night where the fog comes into town and the ghosts are attacking, and the electronics are shutting down because of the fog, they're still able to pick up the radio in their car and hear Stevie frantically begging whoever's listening to save her son. So on one hand they're trying to escape the fog, but as soon as Stevie's voice comes on the radio, Nick's like, all right, we're gonna try and save the kid. And so he's like, the first guy who tries to put his life on the line to go up against whoever this is in the fog, if it means saving a little kid. And so there is heroism with Nick's character in that regard. And Tom Atkins plays it in such a way to where it's like I say, he's not a one-man army or ultimate badass, but he is a grizzled veteran of sorts. And he's someone who does have a take charge attitude in a way, which kind of makes him a strong character. And then you also had Jamie Lee Curtis playing the hitchhiker Elizabeth, and she there was a certain amount of mischievousness with her character, and that kind of goes with the whole notion that Jamie Lee Curtis was wanting to play someone who was a bit more fun-loving in nature, because when she played Laurie Strode in Halloween, Laurie was sort of an uptight good girl. So when she plays the hitchhiker Elizabeth, she plays her as someone who is more willing to explore the world, so to speak, and hence why she's hitchhiking across the country and doing artwork and stuff and supporting herself that way. But I liked her chemistry with Tom Atkins, and you really bought the notion that the two of them hit it off. And I liked how she talks about how she doesn't like to stay in one place for long because strange things keep happening to her, and as well as those around her. And some people like to joke that Elizabeth is actually Laurie Strode from Halloween, and who's basically was so traumatized by the events in Halloween that she's just kind of disappeared and taken on another identity just to get away from things, right? But if that's the case, well, she goes from being attacked by a slasher to, well, being surrounded by the fog, So, I mean, I think that's just a little bit of, joke, kind of an inside joke as far as that goes. But still, I mean, Elizabeth, I thought was a fun character. And I liked how she goes from fun-loving and mischievous to, well, okay, getting serious when, say, bad things are happening. Like, say, when certain people that have gone missing are still not turning up, and said people, even though she doesn't know them, are clearly important to other people and that she's gotten to know. And the fact that these friends that she's made are concerned and sad about or upset about this situation is clearly something that affects her too. And I liked how Jamie Lee Curtis kind of played that, because you could tell that she's definitely come to care for some of the characters, namely Nick. But yeah, she was good in the part, and it was cool to see kind of like a fun side to Jamie Lee Curtis, in the sense that if you're used to her being in horror movies, you're used to her being, say, traumatized and freaked out. But here, though, it's like she's allowed to breathe and live a little and before things get freaky. But when things get freaky, yeah, she's definitely someone who kind of goes into survival mode as far as trying to help Nick or the other people she ends up running across and what have you. And I also liked how while Nick's I thought was a good character, I did like the fact that you had the idea that it was mainly the character of Stevie Wayne, who was played by Adrienne Barbeau. The character of Stevie is the one who gets the most screen time, and comes across as the most heroic, because even though she's in an isolated position, she's the one who sees the most. Like, she's able to, get kind of like a bird's eye view of the fog coming in, and she's able to, try and tell the town, hey, something, weird is going on here. Be careful. And she's, trying to do her best to give like a minute by minute update on, when the fog, when and where the fog's coming in, and what have you. So in the grand scheme of things, Stevie Wayne, is played by Adrienne Barbeau, comes across as the most heroic of the characters. But I guess you could say in terms of people on the ground, Nick probably comes across as, the closest to being heroic, in the sense that, he's, kind of got the whole take charge attitude, and, putting his life on the line to help someone else, that kind of thing. And also liked Hal Holbrook as Father Malone, because Hal Holbrook, was, just, a wonderful actor, and it's, sad that he's gone, but he played Father Malone as, someone who, prior to, the supernatural stuff going on, he was sort of this affable alcoholic. He liked his drink, but at the same time, like, he has sort of a sense of fun to him. But once he finds that journal belonging to his ancestor, he you really see him sort of sober up and, kind of become alert. And you see that this is something that really freaks him out, mainly because it's an ancestor of his that was involved in all this. And he has kind of a connection to all this in that sense, but also, he has an awareness he has an idea that something's coming. He knows something's coming, but he doesn't know, that it's going to be like fog and ghosts / zombies or what have you, but he knows that something supernatural is coming. And I liked, how, as played by Hal Holbrook, Father Malone is someone who sort of becomes an harbinger of doom, in a sense that, he's the one who, stumbles upon the journal, or the journal falls into his lap, more or less. And he's the one who, makes that discovery in the first place. And he's trying to, tell other people. But unfortunately, that revelation falls either on disbelieving ears, or, it falls on ears of someone who doesn't take it as seriously as it should be until it's too late. And even though Father Malone mainly stays in the church, in a sense that he much like Stevie Wayne, he stays, in the location where he works. That's, I guess you could say, his home away from home. But nonetheless, though, he has a presence in the movie. And so even when he's not on screen, you remember him, and, you buy the fact that, he's a fixture of the town. But at the same time, I liked seeing how there's a sense of helplessness with his character, because, he feels that, the whole town's cursed because of all this. And in a way, he's not wrong. But at the same time, there's the whole idea that he's thinking that the whole town should pay for it, including himself. But of course, other people are like, yeah, this may have happened in the past, and this may be on the founders of the town, but not us. We had nothing to do with it, that kind of thing. So you have this sort of conflict there. But also, Charles Cyphers has a part as the weatherman, Dan O'Bannon, who incidentally is named after the writer Dan O'Bannon. But Charles Cyphers was in Halloween as Sheriff Brackett, and so it was interesting seeing him play like a figure of authority in that movie, and then play sort of a wisecracking, laid back fellow in this movie. And his chemistry with Stevie Wayne was, pretty funny, in the sense that you never saw them together, but they constantly talked to each other through the radio, But it was cool seeing him in another horror movie, but it was interesting seeing the fact that he's played two different characters in two different horror movies, but both of them handle the horror in different ways. And I think that in the Halloween movie, as a figure of authority, you know, he handled things better as well as he could in that movie. But here in The Fog, though, well, he's just, a weatherman who doesn't really, take, the warning seriously, and, well, things don't really go well for him. But, yeah, it was cool seeing him, in another horror movie. But, okay, so the stuff that basically elevated this movie, I think, was, one, John Carpenter's really awesome score. I mean, it's something that you listen to a John Carpenter score, or you watch a John Carpenter movie, you're more likely going to get a John Carpenter score. And sure enough, I mean, you have something that is on one hand, eerie, is something strangely beautiful at times, but then downright scary at others. So like, when you're seeing like establishing shots of the town and the beach and everything, there's a sort of relaxing sound to the music, but at the same time there's a bit of eeriness to it, because we're coming off the tail end of a ghost story at the beginning. But then whenever the fog's at work, and when we see the fog on screen, that's when the music gets terrifying. And we're already on the edge of our seat when we see the fog physically coming in and causing havoc, and the ghosts coming in and doing their thing. But the music going hand in hand with that puts us even more on the edge of our seat. So this is definitely one of my favorite John Carpenter scores. And I'm not a music expert or anything like that, so I can't go into the technical terms or anything like that, I'm sorry to say. But just just someone who likes good soundtrack music, I mean, The Fog definitely has one of John Carpenter's best scores in my opinion. But okay, so the special effects, I mean, for the time, for 1980, were amazing when it came to, say, showing the fog coming in and conveying that this fog was not a normal fog but something supernatural. And some of that was due to, say, like lighting. Some of it was like reverse photography, or just art, animation, and what have you, I believe. But all in all, though, whenever the fog is on screen, it's a character unto itself, something mysterious, something evil, something hungry. It's just something that's terrifying. And I mean, you got a movie called The Fog. Sorry, I dropped something. Sorry about that. I dropped the little booklet here that went to the DVD. But anyway, though, yeah. So you have a movie called The Fog. You better have a good looking fog in the movie, and thankfully, The Fog delivers in that regard. So the special effects people who worked to get the fog on screen did just a magnificent job. And I mean, even if, say, you never saw any ghosts or anything like that, and it was just straight up glowing ever expanding ominous fog, I mean, it'd still be something freaky. But we do get ghosts, and we do get sort of zombies as well. I mean, the zombies and ghosts are kind of the same thing, but for the most part, we see them in silhouette form within the fog whenever they're shown. But there is something scary about them, because like the less you see of them, the scarier they are. But we get glimpses of, say, certain details on them, like certain parts of their skin or what have you. Like at one point, in one of the scenes at the climax, one of the big phantoms basically gets hit in the face, and the light catches it on for just a little bit, and you see like green ride skin and worms crawling in and out of its face. It's a brief shot, but it's just enough to show that these ghosts are the waterlogged victims that drowned all those years ago. And these ghosts, I mean, the way they're shown and everything, and the way they're made up. I mean, what little we actually see of the details on them, I mean, it's enough to convey that these are ghosts from a long ago time that died a tragic death, but are very pissed off and are eager for blood. And so, much like, say, the endless horde that of street gang members in Assault on Precinct 13, you have this seemingly endless horde of ghosts coming into the town with the fog, and they make for a very terrifying threat. And so so yeah, just all in all, I mean, the supernatural side of things, I thought was handled very well, both, say, with the fog as well as with the actual ghosts and specters and what have you. But also, I liked how you had the movie itself opening with a ghost story. I keep getting tongue tied on that. I don't know why, but a ghost story, and then of course leading into an actual ghost story, and we see ghosts and fog and everything. So it kind of just starts off and then keeps on going to the point where, I mean, it's like we're reading a ghost story, but we're watching it at the same time on screen. So it's a pretty good, feeling there. But I will say, if there's a problem I had with the movie, it was the fact that once you find out exactly how many conspirators there were that led Blake and his crew to their deaths, once you find out exactly how many conspirators there were, that's when you find out how many people the ghosts are wanting to kill, or quote unquote needing to kill in order for their revenge to be complete. And so while it makes sense, I mean, within the logic of ghost stories, it also dilutes some of the horror, because while we're immersed and on the edge of our seats whenever we see the fog, or whenever the ghosts are coming out of the fog and coming at someone, or just whenever we're hearing that John Carpenter score, we are on the edge of our seats. But after you see the movie and you think about it, though, some of the horror is diluted, because you realize that the ghosts are only going to kill a certain number of people in the town in order to meet their quota, because as in a way awesome as it would be to see the fog and the ghosts taking more than that number of people, it wouldn't make sense within the logic of things. But at the same time, just knowing that that number of people is basically going to be the body count of the movie, it takes away from some of the fear factor, at least in my opinion, because if that hadn't been in place, then there'd be a bit more of a feeling of no one is safe. I mean, there is still that feeling there, but at the same time, you also in the back of your mind know that okay, yes, it's possible that you could be one of the victims if 4 or 5 other people were killed before you, or something along those lines. Then odds are there's a chance that you'll survive, because any more than that, and yeah, the quota's met, but so your chances of survival are good, but at the same time, though, when you're on the ground, you're not really thinking about that. So I mean, it was still a good work of horror in my opinion. It just, with that little revelation though, and knowing that the exact number of people that were going to die was the exact same number of conspirators that there were, and considering that Antonio Bay is, a town full of people, I just think that as spooky as the movie is, I think it would have been, cooler in a horror sense if there had been a higher body count, but it's still, a spooky movie though. Um, One other thing I'll say, in terms of, say, the idea of the body count quota being there and being tied directly to the number of conspirators that there were, it's kind of difficult to tell how the ghosts are determining, who they kill, because, it seems like the people that they kill, are for the most part just innocent people. And at least one of the characters that's in the movie, one of the main characters is, related to someone who was a conspirator. But as far as, the other people who are killed in the movie, we don't really see any, indication that, they were related to conspirators at all, other than the fact that, hey, they live in the town, So I do think it would have been interesting, or at least better in some ways, if they had tried to kind of clear that up. Like, are the ghosts only going to go after, say, people who are directly, descended from, the conspirators that screwed them over in the first place? Or are they just, killing the first person that they see, in the hopes that that'll speed up, the quota being complete? As in, say, I don't know, you're Joe Blow who's out on the road, and you get a flat tire and you're changing it that night, and then you're like, oh crap, there's a bunch of zombies or ghosts surrounding me. I'm dead, but then Joe Blow, it turns out, has no relation to any of the conspirators, Uh, so that's how it kind of feels at times. Like, the deaths seem random, and the only reason they're committed is to meet the quota that the ghosts have. But on the other hand, you have that one person who actually is, related to a conspirator. So I just wish that, the, people who made the movie, like, Carpenter and Debra Hill, like the writers, I wish they could have cleared that up so there'd be a little less confusion. Because some of the kills that we do see, we don't see a whole lot of blood and gore, but we see enough of, say, blades going into bodies and what have you in such a sudden way, or it's like, oh my God, it sort of comes out of nowhere, or something bad's about to happen. But yeah, so it's like you get some good kills and everything, but at the same time, you don't exactly know, okay, is this person being killed directly related to the conspirators? Or are they just, some poor schmuck who's in the wrong place at the wrong time? So a little bit more distinction, I think, would have, made it better in terms of internal story logic, at least just in my opinion. And one other thing, like, I didn't think it was a problem, but it might be a problem to other people. But the fact that Nick and Elizabeth, Elizabeth being the hitchhiker and Nick being the one who picked her up and gave her a ride into town, the fact that they basically hook up, as soon as they do, more or less, as far as we could tell, almost right after they meet. Oh, well, okay, maybe not literally right after they meet, but shows a meeting. They hit it off in the car. They're joking around, and then the windows explode because of midnight witching hour and all that stuff. But then when we see them again, they're at Nick's place, and they've clearly just had sex, and they're sort of winding down from that. So on one hand, it's like in my mind, I'm thinking, way to go, Tom Atkins, because he's with a younger Jamie Lee Curtis, who was very easy on the eyes. But at the same time, I could definitely see where in some ways it'd be a problem for some people, because the fact that she's a hitchhiker who's hooking up with a complete stranger, and just almost as soon as she meets him. And while I do like their chemistry, I mean, they really do, hit it off rather well. And, Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis, I mean, work very well together. You bought that there was, a friendship there. I do think it would have been better if, they had been shown to, say, hooked up, so to speak, after they'd gotten to know each other a little more. Like, maybe, say, there'd been another scene of the two of them together, say after the scene where it shows them meeting for the first time, and Nick giving her a ride into town, say, but then on the other hand, this scene would be before the one showing that they had hooked up, because that I think would have made things a little bit more believable. I mean, I know some people end up hooking up like that in real life, but for the most part, though, I think most film going audiences would feel better about such a relationship if there'd been a scene or two more showing the two of them getting to know each other better. So not necessarily a problem for me, but I could see where it'd be a problem for other people. But yeah, so all in all, though, I'm going to go ahead and give The Fog 4 out of 5 stars. The Fog 4 out of 5 stars. So as far as special features go, I mean, bearing in mind this is a special edition DVD from 2002, there's some good bonus features. You have a then new documentary which showed, like John Carpenter, Adrienne Barbeau, and Debra Hill in the then present, talking about the movie and reminiscing about it, and how it was made and everything. And you've learned a lot about what went into making the movie. And one of the things that I didn't realize until, say, watching the documentary or listening to a commentary track was the fact that there were quite a few miniatures that were put into the movie. And if you see them in the movie, without any sort of prior awareness, you wouldn't know they were miniatures. And so that was some pretty good work. But like you get some of John Carpenter's inspiration, or what inspired him to come up with The Fog. And sure enough, Tales from the Crypt or any other of the old school EC comics were things that inspired him. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just some really neat information and details that you learn from the documentary. And it was also, fascinating, sort of looking back, seeing them as they were in the then present, looking back on a film they made in 1980. And then I'm watching this in 2024, seeing them in the then present, and then realizing that even more times passed. It was kind of one of those wow, time flies moments. But there's also some funny outtakes, like, for example, people forgetting their lines. Like you have John Houseman, who plays Mr. Mencken, the storyteller at the very beginning. You have a little shot of him starting to go into the ghost story, but then completely forgetting his lines, and you'd have this dignified elderly gentleman just slipping up and saying "oh shit" or something like that, and it's pretty funny. And of course, you also have shots of actors who are playing the ghosts, maybe missing their mark, and like they start off coming at the camera ominously, but then like they miss the mark or something, and then they're just like so we also have a storyboard to film comparison, and you have an original 1980 documentary, and that was fascinating to see as well, because it's like, having first watched the new documentary and then watching the original 1980 documentary, it was fascinating seeing some of the people that we seen in this new documentary, in another documentary, except they were even younger. You had, let's see, advertising gallery, liner notes by John Carpenter, and then you have a really well done audio commentary by John Carpenter and Debra Hill. And the two of them, I mean, they have a good rapport with one another. It's never a monotonous, commentary. The two of them, they keep things moving, and they clearly have a history with one another, and a good camaraderie. And you find out a lot about about how the movie was made, stuff that you didn't, hear about in the documentary. But it was just really, cool to, hear an inside perspective on how the movie came to be, and say like the aftermath of it and what have you. And one of the things that is covered in the new documentary and the audio commentary is the fact that originally there was far less of the ghosts on screen. It was and it was more fog than ghosts. But when they originally released it to test audiences, it didn't score that well because, for the most part, it seemed like there was just a bunch of padding with the characters, but very little of, the fog or the ghosts, or there was more fog than ghosts, but not enough ghosts. And so they basically went in and reshot the whole thing to where there was more, of the supernatural that you saw on screen. And also that's kind of one of the reasons why, even though the movie's, not an out and out gore fest, the violence that you do see, like say when the ghosts kill someone, it's just brutal enough to where you're like, oh, like it's not, like I said, it's not an out gore fest, but at the same time, it's sudden and striking enough to where it still sends a chill up your spine. And, like some of the shots where, say, certain characters are stabbed, those were, from when they reshot the movie to, add more horror to it. And instead of just say the horror being limited to just the fog and the occasional shot of a ghost here and there, like you actually had, the ghosts taking on a more predatory tone. So I think, in that instance, the reshoots, definitely helped things. So that was something I learned from both the documentary and the commentary. So but yeah, all in all, this was a good movie. I enjoyed it, and if you like John Carpenter movies and you haven't seen The Fog, definitely check it out. And of course, if you have seen The Fog and you've come across this little baby, this 2002 special edition, I mean, it's worth having for nostalgia's sake. Even if you have a spruced up double disc Blu-ray, DVD, what have you, I mean, it's still worth it to pick this one up too. So also this particular edition has a little booklet here that has a letter from John Carpenter. So I would read it to y'all, but I've already taken enough I have taken up enough of your time. So, but I don't think this particular letter, was in any of the other releases, but I could be mistaken about that. So, yeah, The Fog, 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good little horror movie and a good little ghost story on screen, and it's very fitting to watch in the month of October. So, thank you for taking the time to check this review out, and thanks for stopping by. And you got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. And you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Good night. Bye.